Thanks, Susan, and thanks for putting on this event. It is a world-class event, and we really appreciate all the work that goes into it. I'm David Bienenstock, apparently a professional stoner. I like to think of myself a bit more as a journalist. I've been covering cannabis. I am a stoner. I've been covering cannabis for 15 years. That's a big period of time for cannabis, a lot of change. I now write a lot for Leafly, and I have a podcast called Great Moments in Weed History with Abdullah and Bean. Spoiler alert, I'm Bean. Another guy is Abdullah. I'm very excited for the panel. I'm going to introduce everybody in a second, and then they can, of course, educate and entertain us all. The panel, as promised, is called From Counterculture to Main Street, but I'm actually going to rename it because I don't think that's what we're facing. I think what we're facing is from counterculture to corporate capitalism. When I look at what's going on with cannabis, I see the counterculture and Main Street on one side. We share a lot of the same values. And I see corporate cannabis as this new entity and where things are actually moving. And I think that we all have to be realistic about what that means. I like to say everything bad that's been happening to small businesses and small farmers in this country over the last 50 years is happening to cannabis all at once right now. Is there anybody who doesn't know what I mean by that? Okay, that's pretty powerful. We all know that that's what's happening. I don't even need to explain to you the market forces that are at work. But this is our community and our movement, and it doesn't have to go that way. So I think that idea of that we're moving to Main Street is not really where we're moving. We're moving to corporate capitalism. So let's be honest about that. And let's be honest about Wall Street and what their values are. You know, there was a lot of talk as we approach legalization. Tell me, hands up if you've heard this one. Wall Street and big business are going to legitimize cannabis. Bullshit, right? Anybody disagree? Cannabis, incredibly legitimate. Wall Street and big business, not such a good record. So what we have to ask ourselves as these two forces meet, cannabis and free market capitalism as it's practiced in the United States at least, is it going to add to our culture? Is it going to add to the values of this plant? Or is it going to be an extraction industry? I was just up in Humboldt County. Who knows Humboldt County? Okay, that's the heart and soul, the whole Emerald Triangle, everybody, but really the heart and soul. What are the industries that have been there before? Timber and fishing, they're extraction industries. Well, guess what? They're not there anymore because they took all the trees and they took all the fish, and what they left behind was poor people. Poor people who turned to this plant, turned to cannabis, and found a new way of life. Well, now we're facing another extraction industry. Okay, cannabis is renewable. You have to keep growing it, but what they're extracting is market share. What they're extracting is the value of this plant only in terms of money. And we have to place that value differently. So let me introduce the panel, and I'll just say my first question to them is going to be, how do we balance these things? How do we make sure that the roots culture of cannabis that we all love and that saw us through this prohibition survives? And how do we make sure that the communities that have been targeted by this prohibition, disproportionately put in prison, had their families torn apart, how do we open a door for them and not just let all the market share and all the capital flow to people who, frankly, already have way too much money and way too much power and not a good track record of using it? So that's going to be my first question, but let me introduce everybody, and then they can weigh in. Just raise your hand when I introduce you, because I don't have it in the order that you're sitting. Justin Calvino is the founder of the Mendocino Appellations Project and the co-founder of the Emerald Exchange. He sits on the board of directors of the California Growers Association, as well as the Mendocino County Industry Association. Justin also founded Green Goat Cooperative in Mendocino County. Thanks for coming. Matt Stang, raise your hand, started working at High Times Magazine in 2003 as an intern and is currently the company's chief revenue officer. So he moved up. For almost 20 years, he has met and interacted with nearly everyone in the cannabis community, and his expertise includes marketing, branding, business development, event production, and product viability. And what I love about this panel is it shows everyone coming from different directions all have a place in this community. Leonard has been at the forefront of the digital media revolution for over 25 years. Whether it be the director-writer of the groundbreaking cult classic film Lawnmower Man, yes, woo, which introduced the concept of virtual reality to popular culture, or being the first to pioneer modern stereoscopic techniques and photorealistic CGI in his IMAX film T-Rex. Nichole West has over 10 years of experience in the cannabis industry and has had success in 45 plus cannabis business applications, opened 20 retail locations in 4 states, overseen over $200 million in sales, and has helped scale over 150,000 square feet of cultivation. And yeah, that's a lot. And I'm sorry, Rebecca, is it Gasca? Mm-hmm. I should have just gone for it. Rebecca Gasca is a cannabis business and government affairs strategist whose drug policy experience began in 2008 as the first in-house lobbyist for the ACLU of Nevada. And she is the founder of Pistil and Stigma, which works to bridge the gap between policymakers and the emerging cannabis industry, which is definitely something we're going to get into. But why don't we start closest to me, and we'll move down the line a little bit. Just general thoughts on, as I say, this intersection between cannabis, capitalism, what's to be gained, what are the dangers, and how do we as a community respond to what can be an existential threat? And as we're seeing in the marketplace, a huge number of businesses not able to compete on what's, not really a fair playing field in many ways.
Absolutely. Hello? There's an on button. There it goes. Hi. Oh, there it is. So, yeah, I've been connected to all of this ever since my film was rated as one of the top 10 stoner films of all time by Premiere Magazine a long time ago. So I've constantly been connected to being a stoner professional like you are in the context of being a filmmaker and someone who also is a cannabis enthusiast. I will tell you that the more weed I smoked on the films I made, the more successful that film was. And that literally is a true statement. Beyond that, in context of your question, I feel there's a platonic responsibility for those of us that are global storytellers to tell stories, to shift the narrative around cannabis culture, to make it much more inclusive and more expanded outside of the ghettoization that it has been given by most of Hollywood content and most content in general. Now, there's nothing wrong with stoner comedies. There's actually a few very funny ones and good ones. But that is not the entire story. As a matter of fact, it's the tiniest sliver of the story. So at my company, Studio Lightship, we are very much embedding in many of our IP, our creative projects, which, by the way, encompass what we call VX story worlds, virtual experience. That's what I call VX. It's VR, AR, MR at their core, but are also feature films, digital content, television content, and ARG, and finally at the core, virtual story worlds. In that, as a storyteller, or now as I call myself, story worlder, we are embedding positive, truthful mythology around what this is as a culture. And that needs to lead the way. Storytelling has always led the way in terms of the steering of the zeitgeist. And right now there is, as we all know, there has been a disinformation narrative going on around cannabis culture for a very long time. And it's been stepped up with the increasing success of the new business models. But of course, that's one of the things that's creating the corporatization because there's this feeling like you can't actually address the core soul of what this is about, which is health, healing, and actually a mind medicine for the planet that is unprecedented in human history. And that narrative and that story is something I'm committed to telling, and I believe that that is one of the first steps that has to happen for popular adoption of really understanding what is at the core of cannabis.
Thanks.
Thank you. So I think it's important to note that this isn't a binary. Like, it's not an us versus them. And I think that the longer that sort of framework is extended, the more of a disservice we're doing to ourselves as advocates, as people who care about cannabis, as business owners, as, you know, parents, as scientists, because you can't look at this through a dichotomous lens. As a lobbyist, somebody who comes from drug policy and criminal justice reform, who's a civil libertarian at heart, like, I know that the only way that I was ever able to move the ball down the court was because I reached across aisles, talking to people, even when they thought they weren't gonna agree with me, right? That is how you change the storyline, right? That is how you touch minds and hearts, and it takes everybody to do that. What's most interesting to me is, since I left and I started Pistil and Stigma, I worked with people who have been longtime growers, right? Who were arguably incredibly successful, but they don't know how to create rules to the game, right? And that's what you can do when you are a proactive advocate and lobbyist. You rewrite the rules. And that's what we're doing in this industry. Thankfully, I had a very fortunate opportunity as a lobbyist for the ACLU, where I got entrenched into the actual, like, institutional side of rule writing, right? Policy making, where I got to see how easy it actually was to be able to shift the narrative once you were there and you were applying yourself. I've been lucky that I've been able to take that same experience and apply it from state to state with clients now across the United States, and to be able to take what has otherwise been, you know, institutional capital and teach my clients, like, okay, you come from this banking world, you come from this business world, right, that is very, very different than how the cannabis industry has worked thus far, but I can take your capital and I can apply it in meaningful ways to right some of those wrongs of the, you know, of the criminalized aspects of the industry, and teach people how to otherwise, you know, participate on a level that, on a social justice level, that they've never had the opportunity before, because they've been working through this, you know, blinded set of their own business functions. But now I get to pull them into the cannabis industry and be like, oh, guess what? You get to work with people who care. It's awesome, right? But it does take reaching across the aisle. It does take saying, okay, you might have a different history than I do, but let's talk about how we can co-create this now moving forward. And does it take a lot of money? Yeah, you know, of course. It's not easy to build a business. I learned that, like, you know, I'm a little guy still, right? Like, you know, my firm has learned the hard way, like, how to do business. I come from a nonprofit background, right? But gracefully, I am learning from my own clients, and I'm learning from the engagements that I have, you know, from state to state. And but again, I just want to stress that this is not us versus them. We're all a part of this now.
Sure. I want to just make a quick point. I think there's a big distinction to be made between ending the war on cannabis, ending the arrests, ending this incredibly oppressive system. That's winning the war. And now what we're talking about is winning the peace, which is the economic aspect of it. How many people out here are small cannabis business owners or small growers? And how many of you feel that the rules of the game are fair? I don't see anybody. You know, that speaks kind of volumes to me. And I think that that's what the mentality, we have to pat ourselves on the back really hard for ending this incredibly oppressive system, but we have to be realistic. about what we're up against. And what I'm hearing is an extinction level event for these small business owners and for these small farmers. And it doesn't mean bad intentions. It means we're taking a system that existed outside of mainstream capitalism and pushing it into that system. And we have to, be honest about what's going on.
Thank you. Actually, that's a really good point. And I kind of wanted to parlay off of both of them in my opinions, and it's because I have two different places that I come from in this space. 10 years ago, I was one of the first lottery winners in the city of Long Beach, in this beautiful city that we're all in. Currently, I am not a license holder in the city of Long Beach. I invested a little over $250,000. We played 2 leases for almost 2 years to go through the process. I got a location, for those of you who are familiar with the city of Long Beach. I was over off of Studebaker and Spring, right across from the El Dorado Disc Golf Course. This upset some council members within the city at the time. They were able to overturn the ordinance after they took all of my money, made me relocate and add parks to the ordinance after the fact, thus zoning me out. In the process of me losing my entire life at the youngest business owner in my family, I felt vindicated to fight, right? We're warriors in this fight. The answer is I have to fight and stand up against this. So I fought for almost a year. I had all my friends and family that worked for me. I was receiving $1,000 a day fine to myself and $1,000 fine a day to my landlord. My landlord was pretty cool. He said, keep paying the bills and I'll let you stay as long as you want. But at a certain point when the police are harassing your customers, you decide to shut down your business. My customers were getting tickets. My employees were getting their cars towed. I mean, it became a full-on harassment from the Long Beach PD. I eventually decided I'm going to shut down, but I had fought for too long. That process of fighting for so long in this new ordinance, when the city of Long Beach got all those people that were able to get priority points, because I fought for what we stood up for, I lost my ability to apply for a priority license when Long Beach did their licensing process last year. So I was required to go into the priority 3 section, even though they had taken my entire life from me. And when I say my entire life, I literally mean my entire life, from all of the money I had to my car. Fast forward 10 years, I moved to Colorado because obviously California wasn't ready at the time. I worked for a bunch of companies, and I'm now back. I just started a marketing and branding company, but I do advisement for investment firms. And my main piece of that is from the cannabis industry. I try to claim myself as a fairy godmother of cannabis because I want the people who are coming into this looking for money to know what the heck they're asking for, to know what they're signing up for. And so for me, and for any of you out there who have that bit of knowledge, who have the ability to impart this information to your friends, you owe it to them. You owe it to them so that they can make wise money decisions, because so many of us have been living in shoeboxes of cash, having no interest in even being able to talk to a bank. So the people who are most experienced in this business have no financial understanding of what it even means to look at a banker and say, here's my money. They get nervous when they walk into the bank to cash a personal check. I mean, and that's the truth. And a lot of these people are still coming out of their PTSDs. So if you're one of those people who is coming from the other side, some of my best mentors right now are people that have no interaction with cannabis outside of the fact that they believe in it. And they're coming in from banking, they're coming in from finance, and I'm connecting with these people that understand that this is a movement and that people's lives are being changed by this. And so for me, I say if you have the ability to impart knowledge to one of your farmer friends or extractor friends who's been crushing at what they're doing but maybe have not been able to use a bank or ever ask for money. I mean, if you've been in the industry for more than 5 years, you've never even considered going to a bank to be like, hey, can I have $1 million? They're like, get out of here. And so that reality, we've never even read a book, most of the people, to understand what most of these terms mean. I was at the Boston Freedom Rally, and I told people there's a book called Investment Terms for Dummies, and I know it seems silly, but read it before you go talk to some money people. And something as simple as that. We need to educate ourselves, and for those of us who are already educated, who are making the way, it's your duty to help those people that you know deserve to have a space in this industry to fight for that and to educate your people.
Yeah, absolutely. Let's just for anybody who's not aware, due to cannabis being federally illegal, that prevents not just banking, but getting a bank loan. So you've had a successful business for 10 years. Your books are great to the extent that, you could show them, but you're denied the money to grow your business to compete, and yet somebody with private equity can come in with 100 times your money. They can make 15 fuck-ups and still win, where you get one chance. And then all too often they turn around and say, well, these stoners just don't know how to run a business. And, you know, I think what you're saying is there are people of good intention coming in with the values of the plant, and we want them. But the question is, are you going to add something, or are you just going to extract? You know, how many people had any trouble getting cannabis in California 10 years ago? We know how to grow and distribute cannabis. We don't need private equity to do it. So let's take that off. So what are you going to add? Justin?
Hello? Okay. I want to thank you for this topic. Anybody who knows me knows that this is pretty much all I talk about all day long, like every day. This is it. As you know, I won't drop an expletive there, but capitalism, and there's a word before that.
Fuck is the word he's...
Thank you very much. Fuck capitalism. Last year I said right is relative, and you know, capitalism is messed up at best. And I dealt with Hezekiah, said like, oh my God, I can't believe you said that on stage. And now we're having a full-on discussion. So this is the evolution of the conversation. We're finally tired of it. It's not an us versus them. It's an it. Capitalism is an it. It is a disease. It creates disease. Like I don't feel easy. I don't go to bed easy. I don't wake up easy. I have to tell my children they can and can't do things that we could and couldn't do before. I'm like, you know, and why? You know, it's like, you know, I moved into a beautiful region to raise my family the right way. And I'm watching people who have never touched cannabis before, taking market share, dropping us down 2/3, making things, it's the recriminalization of cannabis. It's not decriminalization, it's not legalization. We got recriminalized. We got put into a separate category. And now, you know, they're like, thank you, we'll take it from here. Good capitalists. This is our chance, while we're still having this conversation, and hopefully this conversation continues, to actually take the main stage that we have and speak out against what we're doing to the rest of the world. We are shipping capitalism around the whole planet, and we're getting to see it now. We're actually getting to experience it as small-scale producers that can tell this story. We can tell the story of how, you know, yesterday I could buy groceries. Next week, I'm probably going to be on food stamps. Week after work, I'm probably going to be working for someone. And that, and then keep on and keep on and keep on. Losing farms, my friends, my neighbors, everyone that I turn to has a different story. I've become a grief counselor on my ridge. I'm not even an activist anymore. The idea that we as small-scale producers have a chance is like sort of like it's like a myth and a hero's journey, right? It's the only thing now that we can do to show the world that like there's a breath left in humanity. I mean, the idea that we are actually seeing people like come in well-funded with $20 million to buy shelf space to push small producers off the market, like, and we're applauding these people. We're cooking them dinners. We're throwing events for them. We're letting them sponsor. It's beyond ridiculous. It's like, and then now we're funding water infrastructure being stolen from Northern California, shipped down to the desert to build billions of dollars of infrastructure to build a new agricultural industry where there was none. That's capitalism. I mean, so like, I could talk for like days and days and days, probably like to zero point and no end, because I think at the end of the day, like, as depressed as I get, it's like I'm also just as hopeful and happy that we're having this conversation. I'm hopeful and happy that we can decentralize agriculture. I'm so happy we're having a collective and cooperative conversation about how to distribute resources. I think that if I was to say something about the segue, is it like work together, don't sell out. You know, every single one of us, like band together, sign JVs, create cooperatives. Don't sell to Canadian companies just because they're offering you hella money. You know what I'm saying? Like, give that IP to your neighbor, and your neighbor's neighbor, and continue that pattern forward. So I don't know. I'm just gonna keep on talking about it. Like,
Thanks.
but yeah, that's how I feel.
Well, let me get one more quick show of hands. Who here in their hearts loves coal more than they love cannabis? Again, nobody. And this is with full respect to people who work in that industry. When we hear, oh my God, we're gonna lose coal jobs, even though we know that industry is polluting the planet potentially into a catastrophe, we collectively act like it's the biggest emergency that ever fucking happened on planet Earth is we have to save these coal jobs. Well, we have 60,000 small cannabis farmers in this state alone, and they're facing that. And we need to react, I would say, even more robustly. And, fuck coal. All right, go, Matt.
Yeah, fuck coal. Totally. No, but it is kind of a terrible polluting. So here's what I would say. I love the Joseph Campbell Hero's Journey reference. I think that's fantastic. I think everyone here is here because they're on their own hero's journey. And I think part of this whole thing, part of this legalization thing that's happening is we're bringing together the people who thought we were 15 years ago when I was at High Times, and I told people I was at High Times, they would be like, that is fucking disgusting, you dirty stoner. And now they're like, hey, can I pick your brain about CBD? Do you know anything about this weed business? What about these Canadian stocks? Is there anything going on that I should know about? Like, is this the craziest thing that's ever happened? And while there is a lot of negativity around it, there's also a lot of positivity because we have a moment now. And I love you, but I don't think the war is over. I don't think we're fighting for the peace yet. I still think we're fighting the war. And I am very, very strongly that we have not won, that there's still large parts of this country that are not, that people are still going to jail. Like, I went to jail, and people are going to jail. And I sat in jail for 5 days with the federal government, and it fucking sucks. And if any of you have done that, it's the worst thing in the entire fucking world. So anything that you can do to get yourself out of that situation, to stop the people from arresting us for cannabis, I am supportive of. I don't like John Boehner. I think he was a fucking asshole. But the fact that he's on Kevin's board now is a huge movement. The fact that Mitch McConnell signed off on the Farm Bill because a couple people I know went in and lobbied the fuck out of him for their farms in Kentucky, that's huge. Like, all of this aside, people should not be going to jail for a fucking plant. Everybody in here, I hope everybody in here agrees with that. So, like, we gotta win the war first before we win the peace, and that really does involve money, because this country, it's a fucked up system, but it's our system. And that's, yes, everyone here should be agitating to change the system, but we also have to change the fact that we're going to fucking jail for weed. And that there's 8 great states that have legalized it, but there's still people going to jail. There's people getting hit in NorCal. I know someone who went to jail 3 weeks ago. They might have been shipping weed somewhere. I don't know. Okay, maybe, okay, sure, okay, yeah. But fuck that. Like, they're still going to jail here in California. What does it require? It requires all of these wonderful people in Congress who you maybe would never want to share a fucking joint with, but you definitely want them to vote on our side. We need the state's bill to pass. We need all of these fucking bills to pass so that people stop going to jail. And that's my position, the same one that we had, me and Bean worked together for many years. We had this conversation many times, smoking joints, playing ping pong. And you have to win the war first. Like, idealism is amazing and it's great, but I don't want anyone to ever go to jail again for weed. And that requires some money and some people with their power to be like, hey, guy who works with me on these projects, vote differently because I gave you X dollars for your last campaign. And that's the shitty system that we're in, but it's the system we're in, and we need to fucking win this war. We can fight about how to make it better, but right now there is still hundreds of thousands of people going to jail every year for smoking cannabis, for distributing cannabis, for bringing cannabis somewhere, for whatever the plant does. They're like, you are now in jail, you are stripped of your freedom, your rights, your voting rights, you're no longer a human being, and that's fucking horrible. And if we don't stop that, if we don't first of all stop that and then get into the, yes, we need to change the rest of the system, yes, you shouldn't be killing small farms to go and build a fucking private equity thing in the desert. That shit is, I'm sorry to any of you who are running a giant facility in the desert, so no insult meant, but like, what the fuck? Like 400,000 square feet in the desert with no water, and you're like, I'm gonna grow tons of weed? Why? Why are you not going up to a place where it's wet all the time and perfect and just work with the people who have their setups there and help them get licensed and give them some money and then make money off of that rather than some absurd gleaming desert dream. Anyway, I'm sorry. I grabbed the mic. I just feel very passionately that if we don't fight for the end of the war on drugs, we can't fight for the peace. And it's not done. People are like, oh, it's done. Don't worry. I'm like, he can, with a stroke of the pen, Donald Trump could fucking arrest all of us. Every one of us. Just like that. And it's still not done. So like, we need to finish that off and then we can all deal with the remnants. But like, first, don't go to jail.
Okay. I think I just absolutely don't go to jail. And don't get caught. The first responsibility of any revolutionary is not to get caught. They can't arrest you if you don't get caught. I hope it's pretty obvious that, I've dedicated my professional career to that idea that we need to end this war on people ultimately, on marginalized people specifically. I just don't think that the two ideas are mutually exclusive. The idea that we work to end this oppressive system, but that we don't give over our values and our community to these moneyed interests along the way. I don't think there's ever a right time to do that, and I don't think there's ever a wrong time to stand up for what you value and what you believe in. And it's like, to me, that's a false choice. We don't have to put all these farmers out of business, and we don't have to put all these mom and pop true believer people who put their asses on the line, and many of whom went to prison. We don't have to push them out into the street and push them back into the black market in order to win. Neither political party backed us, and we still won. We took on the criminal justice system. We took on the medical establishment. We took on both political parties. We took on the public and propaganda, and we won, and we did it. And the politicians came along for the ride once we proved that this was a winning issue. They didn't lead, and it wasn't a bribe. It was us that changed and ended this. And it's like, if we give over to the idea that it was some outside benevolent force that did it, we lose our agency and we lose our sense of community, and we become sharecroppers to corporate America. And that's not my vision, and I think there's no wrong time to start pushing back against that. Which gets to my next question for the panel. If we really can't look at big business to change outside of its own best interests, the economic fight is on very difficult terrain, but the culture fight is one that we can win. So how do we, and Brett, this is a great question to start with you, how do we educate consumers who will ultimately vote with their dollars to support the kind of businesses and the kind of business practices that make this such an amazing and valuable community?
Well, you've got to entertain people in our culture. You can't just call it education. It can't just be set in this sort of dry situation. It has to be something that is done in a way that moves emotion. on a mass scale. And that's what's incumbent upon storytellers to tell better, more powerful stories. And I believe, as Rebecca said, the core thing here is to not polarize. The greater narrative that this all fits into is the greater narrative we're all experiencing in American culture and, many ways, global culture right now, writ large. This is a time of separation and dividing and pitting things against each other. As long as we push against that with our stories and push against it in a way that creates the war, and it is a war. I totally agree we haven't won the war. As long as we push against that way, we're going to get that same resistance back, sometimes even more powerful. And so we have to find a clever way of shifting the overall mass perception. And that is not playing to our own room. It's not ghettoizing it to be something that is just for those of us that know, and there's the smart stoners. I mean, there's so many ways that elitism creeps into every group, into every fight, into every revolution. And that can't happen here, because the truth is the core and soul of this plant is for everyone. It's something that creates so many ways of making your life better. And that's not just about getting stoned. That's one tiny little aspect of it. So that larger story and the ability to shift it from the polarization, that's the challenge. And I think that's where the answer lies, to start moving the body politic and the group, zeitgeist in the right direction.
I would agree that this is a global phenomenon, right? This stupid war on drugs has really divided us in ways that are so beyond unfortunate. But it's not just California, right? I mean, obviously, look at things from a state to state level, but look at things from a country to country level, right? The U.S. has been throwing its weight around for far too long in criminalizing consumption on a global scale of one of the most powerfully medicinal plants that we know of. And I mean, that's just one of, right? Coca, and you can go on to other psychedelics. Plants are powerful, and that was realized. That was, the core of this war on drugs. Heaven forbid, people get along. Shit, because then the military-industrial complex. Yeah, I could go on that forever and ever too. But really, I really think this comes down to popularizing some stories, right? I mean, this is what happened. This is what we saw with Charlotte's Web, right? Sanjay Gupta, Weeds, all of that. Like, you move emotions, you move people. You get people to start seeing, like, this is like gay marriage, right? Gay marriage. Oh my gosh, I actually have a cousin who's gay. So all of a sudden, it's not that terrible. Oh, my mom's, her retirement community ladies are like, ooh, we want to know what this CBD is, right? Like, we heard this could help. So you take those opportunities and you start educating people where they're at. And that's been the problem, I think, for so long in this work that we've done. It's been disparate messaging, right? Because we're not starting where other people are coming from, Some people, but some assholes don't care that black and brown people have been going to jail. They still don't. And you know what? We might never convince them otherwise that is actually a real fucking problem. So we start to educate them where they're at, with grandma, right? With their grandchildren who have autism. You start looking at it from different angles, because this cannabis plant is actually a dodecahedron, right? It is immensely powerful, and it can touch everybody. And I truly believe Ethan Russo's theory of the endocannabinoid deficiency. I think that we have been living for way too long with not enough cannabis to treat our endocannabinoid system. So, I know that's like a heady idea for most people, but it's just natural food. Let thy food be thy medicine. There are a lot of different ways, essentially, to storytell this, and we're all responsible in different ways for it.
And to make it more successful commercially in this form, because we are in the system we're in. We are in a capitalist society. We can't but deny that. That's real. I mean, every business that gets to this point these inflection points, suddenly the giant money comes in, and those players come in on every single vertical you can imagine. So this is not a new story. That's why it's really a much larger thing that I think this is perfectly emblematic of, and we can make it the emblem of smaller is better. It literally will connect directly to better healing, better lifestyle, better wellness, better joy. When we can tell that story and make people understand it, then this thing moves.
Nichole?
So yet again, my answer is kind of a combination of both of them. The entertainment factor is huge. My example on that is my grandmother. I told my grandma I was a day trader for the first 5 years of being in this business. I told her I sold commodities, which to this day I still believe is pretty much the truth. But in the process, when my grandma found out it was the end of the world, I was a drug dealer. I was destroying my grandfather's life because he was dying, and I was sneaking him edibles so that he could live the end of his life in a good way. I was going to destroy my grandfather's life, who was in a wheelchair, and he was going to wheel himself out on the Long Beach Boulevard looking for some crack or something. I was the devil. And since the education factor, I could have done the most. I tried to tell my grandma I had booklets and I had information, but the entertainment piece got my grandma. She watched a few of those. It really changed her in a big way. And then the next piece of getting to people where they are, I agree. And yes, educating my grandma was huge. She's the person that shows up and votes every single time. But local government, people forget how easy it is to become a city council member. I know that not to say it's the easiest thing in the world, but it's not like becoming president. You can make a difference in your local community, and even if you're not going to become a city council member, to get to those people where they are, because most people who go into politics want to continue in politics, right? Nobody starts as a mayor and is like, yeah, this is it, I'm done. Most mayors want to go on into Congress or something higher. And so if we start on a level where they're actually listening to us and they kind of still have to listen to us, as just a person that shows up to city council and waits for your 3 minutes, you get to speak to them where they are. And if we can start at an early stage in their political development and help educate people politically early on before they become your president, side note on that, but no, but before they become, a governor or a congressman or somebody who has political experience, before that happens, if we could get to them where they are as a city council member or as a mayor. Mayor Robert Garcia was here this morning. If you had a chance to speak with him. When I was going through the City of Long Beach drama, he was a council member. I've been in his office. He's heard my issues. We've had one-on-one meetings. And not to say that I changed his mind, but all of us helped him understand where now you have a mayor who supports this. And that's huge. We all got to somebody where he was and was able to really help educate a council member who then went on to be mayor, who's now much more powerful and is allowing for things to happen that I don't know would have happened without Mayor Robert Garcia. And so it's kind of a combination. The entertainment gets the voters to listen, the voting age in a big way, and talking to people where they are, we can bring people into politics knowing about how amazing cannabis is, rather than trying to convince somebody who's been doing their job for 30 years and has already kind of put the cloak over their eyes that this is a drug. And a lot of these people still really do believe that there's a war on cannabis out there, and they need to fight against us because the war's not over. This is still very real. But I would say entertain and talk to your local teams, your local governments. Especially when we talk about the equity, that's locally being done because local governments did realize that this is a problem, that people have been going to jail for this by being racially profiled. That's a huge issue. And local governments, the state understands that it's a thing, but local governments are choosing to enact their equity programs. And that's because somebody talked to their local government and said, this has to happen, and they want to make change. I am really excited to hear Kat speak, by the way, because that's somebody that is really interesting right now, if you guys aren't familiar with Kat Packer, but following the equity movement in LA has been really, really interesting, and I'm proud of what's happening right now.
Thanks. Justin, I think the Appalachian program that you could speak on is one of the great things to come out of Prop 64 to help us educate these consumers, right?
Yeah. Stick it up here. Okay. Hey, guys. Susan, this is rapidly becoming my favorite panel ever. We've got a moderator that allows us to drop F-bombs. We have a capitalist bashing session, and one of your panelists just dropped dodecahedron on the stage. So I'm like, all right. So basically, I'm kind of cheating here because I live in a region that is steeped in heritage. We are a legacy of small farmers. Every day is a. I don't know that you eat the mic. All right. Every day is a story. Everything that we do is a story. Everything is a story that replicates what's been going on for almost 5 decades in that region. So, the edutainment, or however, whatever, we want to call it, where we're actually like educating people while having fun, is what we're about. Because in Northern California, that's what we want to do. It's we came up there to basically become small farmers, raise our families a certain way, and have fun. In 2015, in developing the Mendocino Appellations project, realizing that, sort of resource mapping, community resource mapping, economic development, seeing that no one in their right mind would stick a commodities grow 2.5 hours on the backside of a mountain down a windy road where 2 cars going down at the same time, passing each other, almost created off of a cliff, makes absolutely no sense to a commodities distributor. All we have in that region is tourism, and all we have is our story, and all we have is our quality. And to tell the story of the breeding, to tell the story of the communities, to tell the story of the heritage in that region is not only our right, is not only our saving grace, but it's also our gift to the rest of the world. Because now we are creating a system. Is everyone here familiar with appellations of origin? Okay, so similar to wine in France, essentially like Bordeaux, Champagne. In Northern California, in Mendocino, we developed a map that's very similar to these regions. So we've broken our county up into multiple regions, and each one of those regions has its own unique heritage, its own unique strains, its own unique communities, and will eventually create its own unique brand around that story. So being able to do this and being able to split these regions up into these cultural hubs will allow us to distribute our cannabis at a higher price, remain small, cooperate, know your neighbor, know your distributor, know your market, come down to Los Angeles like we're doing right now and actually telling that story through the Emerald Exchange. I'm not trying to selflessly name drop it, just like where I work. But I mean, basically, we have these entertainment events. We come down, we tell the story, we bring the products, we talk about the small batch and the lifestyle. So, the idea is that, like I said, I feel like I'm cheating because I just live this life, and I feel so optimistic. Like what I said was kind of depressed. I'm also just as hopeful, because no one can ever take away our place. There's no one that's ever going to be able to grow a Kamshi Kush. There's no one ever going to be able to grow a Spyrock Sour Diesel. All of these epigenetic expressions are happening in those regions specifically. You can't recreate it. So I really believe that through that story of cultural heritage that, I believe we're going to be all right in that region. I don't believe all of us are. I think we have like 30,000 plus farmers. But 80% of us, if not more, way more than 80%, are not legal at all. I mean, we're talking about, I think we have 200 legal cultivation licenses in Mendocino County right now going into the market. And every single gate on my ridge is locked because there's cannabis behind it. So, and that's one ridge, I can count over 200 people. So, I mean, by no means is this, going to win it for everyone, but it's definitely a good shot moving forward.
Thanks.
Yep. I kind of forgot what the question was, honestly. So
How do we educate consumers to support the real grassroots movement of cannabis that kept this movement going through Prohibition?
Thank you. And I didn't even get stoned today, so I guess here's what I would say. I think there's probably 10 media companies filming right now. I think there's wonderful events. Tim is sitting back there from the Emerald Cup, the Emerald Exchange here. I think there's places that educate both experientially and in written, print, digital form. that are putting out stories in a great way that kind of bring that feeling that the cannabis is normal, that marijuana is safer than alcohol, as our friend Mason put it out there many years ago and helped change the world. And I think that's the biggest thing that anyone here can do is tell that story, because humans are a storytelling people. Like we all want to gather around the fire and listen. And I think back to his Joseph Campbell reference, thank you for that. That was what made this my favorite panel. But I think if you look at it as a way for people to go and normalize and make cannabis not something that's scary or dirty or makes your grandfather smoke crack, I think there's a lot of things that you can do. Just all the people sitting here, all the media companies, all of the event companies, all of these people who are out there telling the story. This event right here is normalizing cannabis. We're on the Queen Mary. We're on a beautiful historic ship in the middle of Long Beach and having a cannabis event with a bunch of tourists walking around. And I think people seeing that it's not scary, that it's not dirty, that it's not something that's going to lead to some terrible other thing, which what it's leading to was never that in the first place, but just convincing people that all of it was propaganda, that it's all bullshit, that utilizing cannabis is a right, is a natural plant-based medicine, as there are many other plant-based medicines that are currently outlawed by the system because they create people who question, they create people who want to understand more, who want to seek and search, and that's not good for a controlled system. And so it really comes down to people messaging that and creating great content, great events, great other things that you can interact with and take away and tell that story to your friends and your family and their friends and their family. And you wind up, that's the most powerful thing in the world. The most powerful thing is not something someone tells you to do, it's what you feel internally and want to tell everyone else. And you want to give that. So I think that's probably the most powerful thing that people can do here. And I think they're doing it right now. I think it's happening here. It's happening in other places. There's events all over the country now where cannabis is normal, where it feels like something that's just integrated into normal life. And that's probably the best way we can really win this war in a final way, when people are like, I don't believe you. I don't believe that cannabis is a drug. I just don't believe that this is a bad substance that's going to hurt people. We win. It's over. They can't keep fighting the same war.
Thanks. So we're the last panel of the day, and we're running out of time. So I'm going to just say we'll do maybe an informal question and just come up and ask us. And the cash kings of cannabis and all that. Well, what that was the corporate media coming into our world and deciding for us what stories we're going to tell about ourselves. And they wanted to tell those stories because it lets them off the hook for being the propaganda wing of prohibition, for convincing for 100 years everyone in this country that they were right and we were wrong, that we were people of low value, that we X, Y, and Z deserved to go to jail, basically. The stories that they didn't want to tell were about our real community, about our farmers, about our small business people, about people who'd been trampled by this war. I didn't see a lot of shows like that, and there's a reason. The New York Times didn't endorse legalization until 2014. That's fucking ridiculous. You're supposed to be the paper of record. You're supposed to be intelligent people. You couldn't figure that out until 2014? The Denver Post told everybody in an editorial to vote against legalization. Guess what they did like 3 months later? They started the Cannabis so that they could cash in. I know good people who worked at the Cannabis. I think they put out a great product. I'm not knocking them. But what I'm saying is that's how this corporate media works. That's how they see us, same fucking way. And guess what happened to the Cannabis? It got shut down because a bunch of hedge fund assholes bought the newspaper. And that's what's happening to the media. Okay, how many farmers remember when it was $4 or $5 grand for a pound? Yeah, fuck yeah. What is it now? Yeah, I don't remember. I'm not as old, but $2 a word used to be a good rate for a writer. It ain't anymore. Let me fucking tell you. The same things, the two things that I've worked in my whole life are the media and cannabis. I see the influence of corporate America on both of them. So when you look at your news stories and you look at your storytellers and you decide what are the stories we're going to tell about ourselves and to each other and to the rest of the world, that really matters. Support the kind of media that you believe in. Support the kind of media that reflects the values of not just this community, but this plant. Thank you. And thank you to our entire panel. It was really wonderful. It was a diverse group of people. Please come up and ask questions. Please come up and hang out with us. I'm sorry we didn't have a Q&A. What?
Bonta is supposed to be here. He's not. The food doesn't start. Here we go. The food doesn't start until 5:45, the cocktails, everything on the veranda grill. So we do have time for Q&A.
Well, do we have people with questions? Right,
Come
just
up
quick
here.
raise a hand if you
Come up
want to ask
here.
a question to the panel.
Or you can keep going for a few more minutes. Questions, anyone? Come on up here. Where's Matt?
So I liked the direction that this panel headed, and I think when we're talking about small and craft, we can also talk about small craft events, and there's a big sort of, it's funny, I look at sort of who puts on events, and the event later this week in downtown LA, it's big, it's corporate, it's an event production company that just looks at industries and says, the banking industry, there's money to be made throwing events there. The healthcare industry, let's launch the healthcare event series. Oh, cannabis, we can make money there. And then you have people who are doing sort of the small craft events. And I just want to say it's appreciated that you all come to events like this. Definitely go to the downtown event, but it's important to come show up to events like this as well. Which locally produced event by a local resident.
/activist. Yeah, so if anyone else have a question for this amazing panel? Nobody? Nobody? No?
You can't smoke weed on the boat, so you might as well ask a question. All right, we got a question. Can you come up, please?
I'll ask you from right here.
That's cool.
Seeing all the media cameras, how do we get access to the video?
Oh, okay, Bonta is here.
Oh.
Yeah, okay.
All right, well, once again, thank you to everyone on the panel. And,
Hi.
we do have another question.
Yeah. Okay. It was mentioned about, people are still getting arrested over marijuana. And we have 3 strikes law that's still here, which means that if you get arrested for a drug more than 3 times, it's a felony. And if you get arrested for 3 felonies, it's life. And I think that that's pretty horrific. But for the individuals that are incarcerated right now for past marijuana laws, it was just on my mind, is there thoughts in anybody's minds about, counteracting that? Because I know that it's a lot of colored people that are facing that, and those are families that are ripped apart. So, for us now, we all want to stay out, but what about those people that, have been locked up for years and years and years over a couple joints? So.
Absolutely. I'll leave it to the panel, but I'll say off the top in Prop 64, there are provisions for expungement of records and for people to petition the government. It should be a blanket thing to just let people out. Well, no, it passed, I'm saying. The law that passed includes some of those provisions, and some local communities have chosen to expunge people's records even automatically.
San Francisco, 500. There was a number I saw in a paper recently. San Francisco let out several hundred people that all had previous marijuana convictions. I know for a fact they've done it. Colorado did it in a big way. 2015. It was some like billions of dollars in savings from letting these people out of jail that they were, keeping in. So again, I'm going to go back to making sure that we pay attention to local communities, because local communities are going to be able to push on this like the city of San Francisco was able to. So, people need to start leaning on Los Angeles and Sacramento and these other cities in a way. If you have some involvement in your local community, I feel like that's probably one of the best ways that we can right now, because 64 did allow for it. Again, similar to the way social equity is working, the communities are going to have to stand up and do this. The state as a whole, as it stands right now, is not. But if, San Francisco can do it, anybody can.
So a quick question. We're talking a lot about how we can, as citizens at this low level, interact with our government officials, both from a city level and state level. But there's, I feel like, another opportunity that we have to be able to act as private citizens. And I wanted to get the panel's thoughts on using concepts such as jury nullification to help prevent the conviction of again, like you mentioned, people of color who have been unequitably targeted throughout the drug war. Do you feel that that's something that we could educate, not just here where we have legal markets medicinally and recreationally, but nationwide, to help prevent further damage being done to the equity of those unfortunately targeted people?
Is there anybody who specifically wants to weigh in on that?
All right. I probably don't have a really great answer for you. There are several criminal justice reform groups who theorize and strategize around a question like that. I'm not sure that the cannabis industry is equipped for something as technical, but it's certainly a good idea. Certainly juries, we do understand, are not representative. They're not peers, who are convicting people, historically speaking. That's why jury selection is such a complicated thing. That's why people hire expensive attorneys, especially when they are looking at the, threat of going to jail for life, if you can afford that. Otherwise, if you're stuck with a criminal public defender, right, who has a caseload of 400, the options are much more limited. I think that's creative. I think, stories or ideas like that are certainly ways in which the cannabis industry could contribute by, in some sort of reparations. Obviously, what we've seen mostly have been these equity, reform projects. But I think that's why organizations like the ACLU are so important in arenas like this, because they span, they're intersectional, right? It's not just cannabis, it's criminal justice reform as well. Sorry, that's probably not a good answer, but.
Yeah, I just think to weigh in, add to what you said, I think the role for the industry in criminal justice reform is to support criminal justice reform financially, and the people who've dedicated their lives to doing that don't need anything except resources. Specifically to jury nullification, that's, gets a little into the weeds. Bad pun is my stock and trade, but on the grander scale, if you're making a lot of money off of this plant or off of this community, or in a better way, if you're making a lot of money with this plant and with this community, and you think to yourself, well, what good can I do with that money? Start with criminal justice reform. Start with undoing the damage that we're doing right now and the damage we've done in the past. And there are plenty of organizations that are worthy and willing and ready and already engaged in that fight, and you can support them with your resources. And we're good? Okay, that's a great note to wrap it up. One more time, thanks to an incredible panel, and come say hi later.